The Labour government prescribing Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation was always a political risk. That's because Palestine Action are very clearly not terrorists. They've never done any terrorism. They've never planned any terrorism. And after a weekend in which over 500 people were arrested for peacefully holding signs, the media are beginning to wake up to that fact.
Has the government got a bit of a tiger by the tail here in prescribing Palestine Action when you see that kind of protest by that kind of person?
We don't support terrorists in the United Kingdom, Richard. Would you be asking me that if this was about the IRA or Hamas? Palestine Action are a prescribed terrorist organisation.
Well, you make a comparison with the IRA and with Hamas. Of course, you could say the difference here is that the IRA planted multiple bombs. They operated with snipers. They were a very deadly force in these islands. And Hamas, of course, is responsible for what happened on October the 7th, which was a pogrom. I guess what I'm suggesting to you, and I'm not implying an opinion myself, is that Palestine Action, whereas it may have done, as you say, some collateral damage to machinery by spraying it with paint, isn't quite in the same league.
That's violent criminal damage to RAF aircraft, of which is a national security measure. These are a prescribed terrorist organisation, Richard, and we do not support terrorists in this country.
It's so patently cynical, right? His question is, these people aren't terrorists, are they? It's just, they are a prescribed terrorist organisation. Actually, you prescribe them. You can't say, well, I mean, they can actually. This is what happens by law, right? Which is they can sort of say something and it suddenly becomes true because by law, Palestine Action are a terrorist organisation. But the question Richard Madeley is putting to her is to say, they clearly shouldn't be a terrorist organisation. And her justification is to say, well, we don't support terrorists. They're only terrorists because you called them terrorists. It's like a really bizarre circular logic. I had to look up, because I did know this person's name, but I'd forgotten it. So I had to look up the clip. She's called Alex Davies-Jones, MP. She is the Labour MP for Pontypridd. She's Minister for Victims and Violence Against Women and Girls. And she is now very, very angry about crimes with no victims, other than planes, I suppose. Of course, lots of women and girls being killed by Israel in Gaza. Ash, I think I don't just think it's us and people like us watching the news and thinking, this is ridiculous.
Michael, I can't believe I'm hearing you say this because obviously warplanes are women too. And I would go further than that. Weapons factories like Elbit Systems, they are also women and girls. So by splashing paint on them, is that not a form of violence against women? I think that this particular MP is not alone in completely abdicating herself of any sort of dignity, because doing so means she gets to hold on to her junior minister position. I don't think she really believes what she's saying. So she's got the talking points. Okay, well, I'm going to compare Palestine Action to IRA and Hamas because, those were also prescribed terrorist organizations. Of course, the IRA was before this particular bit of legislation came in, but they were legally considered terrorist organizations, and so are Palestine Action. So you saying, how dare you compare the two? Well, by virtue of the categorization that's done. It's a completely dishonest form of argument. But that's what she has to do to keep her spot as a junior minister. She's not the only one who I've seen out there defending the indefensible. Seeing Miata Fanbuller, the MP for Peckham, who used to be a sort of lefty think tank person. And, I certainly know that left-wing, pressure groups like Green New Deal Rising thought of her as, one of their own. What she's been spending last week doing it was her turn on the media rounds. That meant that she had to first say that Rushanara Ali, she didn't break the law when she kicked out her tenants and increased the rent on her flat. And then the next morning, when she was on Good Morning Britain, she was defending the government's line on Israel and saying, of course, we take it really seriously. And doing the maximum amount possible, which is obviously a crock of shit, right? It's obviously a complete crock of shit. The government isn't doing what's maximally possible. There are no sanctions. We're still selling F-35 components to Israel. We still have a relationship with Israel. The government isn't doing the maximum at all. Don't believe what they're saying. They just think that this is the price you pay for a junior minister position where you're not even going to get anything done unless Morgan McSweeney says, yes, this is a policy area that's allowed to progress. So I look at the MP for Pontypridd, and I have to laugh at her. I have to laugh at her because it's so obvious what's going to happen, which is you're going to spend these years dragging yourself around the news studios and making a complete tit of yourself, quite frankly, only to be sacked when there's a right-wing Labour coup and Keir Starmer gets defenestrated. And when that happens, I will laugh, Michael. I will laugh very, very hard.
We both messed up there, Ash, because we both said Pontypridd. It's Pontypridd. I used to say the Senate, now I say the Senedd, but I haven't managed to properly internalise that the D is pronounced for in Welsh. So thank you so much. Was it Pennywise who pointed? No, it was Shiny Warm who pointed that out. So thank you so much for that correction. In terms of what people, not like us, are thinking about this, scanning Twitter over the weekend, it does seem like the protest on Saturday seems to be rallying opinion against the Palestine Action ban. So Peter Hain, obviously he was a minister in the Tony Blair governments, also part of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. He says, this is totally predictable madness. Palestine Action is not equivalent to real terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda or Islamic State. That's why I voted against its ban. To which the minister against violence against girls would say, but they are a terrorist organization because look at the law. Michael Crick agreed with Peter Hain. He said, agree, it's wrecked any reputation Yvette Cooper had for common sense. I mean, Ash, do you have any sense of where this is going? I suppose it's probably the case that Morgan McSweeney thinks that, while Michael Crick and Peter Hain think this is madness, their target voters still do think Palestine Action are maybe terrorists. I mean, obviously there's this judicial review coming up. If that overturns it, that would be incredibly embarrassing because I think, don't quote me on this because I'm not a lawyer, but I think that would put under question everyone's arrests and charges for breaking the Terror Act if it gets struck down. Not 100% sure on that, so don't take my word for it. But where do you see this going? Do you think that ultimately Labour are going to say, look, we're getting some flack from the usual quarters, but if we just keep our heads down and stick to this, then ultimately the movement against this prescription will die down because we arrest so many people, I suppose?
Initially, when the prescription went through, there was some polling done by, I think it was YouGov, and what it showed was that a slim majority of people agreed that it was right to prescribe Palestine Action. Now, I'm speculating about why that is, but here's what my gut instinct says. My gut instinct on it is Palestine Action broke into an RAF base. They vandalized warplanes. And I think people see that as a really serious form of criminal damage, which does have national security implication because it's an RAF war base, it's warplanes. And also we're not living in the era of Greenham Common. I think that the public tolerance for protest is a lot smaller than it used to be in previous decades. So I think that when initially prescription came through and it was like, well, you should treat them as terrorists because this is a national security issue. And also I think the same way, there was a fair amount of public support for really, really harsh treatment of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil protesters. People think, well, if the existing law isn't dissuading them from doing this disruptive thing, do whatever it takes to lock them up. I think that that's part of what you might call the median authoritarianism of the British public. But most people aren't like me and you, all right? They haven't spent loads and loads of time poring over the specifics of the Terrorism Act like we had to do because we're journalists and the prescription of Palestine Action affects us in terms of the kinds of coverage that we can do. Because when you familiarize yourself with the specifics of the legislation and you realize that there are no journalistic exemptions, that someone can be arrested and charged with terror offenses for wearing a t-shirt or holding a sign, or indeed holding up a sign of a private eye cartoon, then your opinion may possibly shift. And you might still think, well, I don't like Palestine Action, but I don't like crackdowns on free speech either. So I think that that's why, tactically, Defend Our Juries have gone for this approach, which is identifying the weak point, if not in the legislation, but in public opinion, as being about expressions of support rather than something like membership or financial support or the tactic themselves. Because I think that that's where you can get a bit of a split between the initial thing of, I don't like these people, they broke into an airbase, to I don't think that prescription was the right thing either.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more elderly people who are seen being carried away by policemen, the more ridiculous this is going to look.